Because meditation is practicing being receptive and inclusive. Awareness is receptive and inclusive. It doesn't exclude anything. It allows everything to be as it is. And because the nature of awareness itself is it's inclusive and receptive of everything, it welcomes everything to occur as it occurs, nothing can violate that. Do you understand? Nothing can violate that. So if there's anything that occurs during the time you're practicing meditation, during the time that you're practicing meditation, if there's anything occurs that during the time that you're practicing meditation that has you identify with whatever that is and have that be something that you're doing wrong or some mistake you're making or that you're not doing the meditation right? That doesn't matter. As long as even when that happens, you just notice that that's what happened. And you don't draw a conclusion about it. You don't believe it. You don't think it's true that you did anything wrong. That's just the mind. This is very important because, you know, we all have a superego. We all have a cop in our head, right? That was put there when you were a kid. If you were raised in a certain religious belief system, it's a very punitive cop, right? That tells you you're a sinner, that tells you, you know, you're a bad person, or you do all the things that you do in your life that are the wrong things that you have to hide from the rest of the world, or they'll find out how no good you are. All that needs to be washed out. That needs to be washed out, and they talk about it in the East, purified, right? Purified. You have to allow yourself to forgive yourself. You have to allow yourself to accept the truth about yourself, which is that you're innocent. This is not just true about you, it's true about all of human beings. And how do you do that? Well, you apply the equanimity, you apply the nature of awareness to that. The nature of awareness is inclusive, it is without judgment, right? It welcomes everything. It even welcomes your worst thoughts about yourself as just thoughts. So if you apply this, the nature of the self, the nature of awareness, if you apply that to the experience you have of yourself as a person, you can purify yourself. You can let go of all your sins in the snap of a finger. It's what Jesus Christ meant when he said, this is a statement that I heard, and when I heard it, it made a huge difference to me, because I, like many others who were raised in Catholicism, believed that I was a hopeless sinner, right? And I heard this statement that was supposed to be a quote from Jesus Christ that said, if your sins are as many of the grains of sand on all the beaches in the world, I forgive you. Now that's a pretty dramatic statement, right? Because it's not even getting into what did you do. You could have murdered somebody and you just, in the snap of a finger, you were just forgiven, right? Well, what that statement is reflecting is what I just said, which is the nature of awareness. You know, that you are innocent. That you are innocent. That anything that you've done that has been destructive or hurtful, whether it be to yourself, your body, to other people, was done in ignorance. It was done in innocence. That's what was meant in the statement in Christianity when Jesus Christ was being crucified, and he said about the soldiers who were standing there who, you know, nailed him on the cross, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. How can you hold them accountable, right? You wouldn't hold a baby accountable for knocking over a bottle of milk, right? You wouldn't hold a baby accountable for that. You wouldn't hold an animal that is just being its natural self, that may do something around you that was uncomfortable or that you had to fix or clean up, because there was no conscious intention. And there can't be any conscious intention when somebody carries out an act like that. Because it is unlike the nature of the truth. You know, having worked in prisons for 30 years and having talked directly to serial murderers on death row, and having met a lot of people who committed heinous crimes, in working with them as a psychologist and doing psychotherapy with them, where in the privacy of psychotherapy, they really told me the truth about what they were doing. And in some cases, that was pretty gruesome, right? But even then, before I understood as much as I do now about the truth, even then I had this sense that this is just another human being. They didn't have an evil mind. They weren't like, they didn't have evil intentions. And in the work that I did with prison inmates near the end of my career, I had the opportunity to work with them and present them with the type of thing that I'm talking to you about right now. And I saw with my eyes people who were reborn. I saw with my eyes people who did let go of the past and did let go of what they were holding against themselves and were free to create a different future for themselves. People who had very severe drug addictions got completely clean and went out. There's one guy that was really heavily addicted that I was working with in one of the groups that I worked with in the prison. And, you know, in the prison, you can still get drugs. I mean, you know, it's not, you may have to pay more for them or be a little creative, but you can still get drugs. And this guy was getting drugs in prison. He was getting prescribed medication that he was abusing. He was getting heroin. He was getting different drugs and staying high in prison. And I started to work with this guy. And through the work we did together, he woke up and saw the truth and became free and established the first Narcotics Anonymous group in the prison. And ran that group until he was released. And then after he was released, he became a leader in the AA and NA community. And went back to school and got a graduate degree. And now he goes into prisons and works with inmates around addiction issues. So that's what's possible. And if, you know, and one of the reasons that I'm motivated to do this work now and to teach meditation is because it's evident to me that there is no such thing as a human being that can't get this. There's no such thing as a human being that is a lost soul. The possibility is the same exact possibility for all of humanity, no matter what a person has done, no matter what condition they're in. Even people that have severe mental illnesses or handicaps can get this. And for them, it's a very liberating thing to get because, you know, many of those people live inside of a diagnosis. Many of those people live in a world in which they're considered to be broken or considered to be limited and unable to function and unable to participate in the community and the society. And that's just not true. It's just not true. They have the right to be happy just like any sentient being, if given the opportunity to experience that. And that's really what this is all about. You know, I assume that your presence here is a function of your appreciating the possibility that this is in terms of your discovering who you are, right? And out of that discovery, realizing the possibility that is available to you to be satisfied and happy and content and successful in living a human life. What does that mean? Well, it means that you're happy. It means that you are loving, that you are a natural expression of unconditional love. How do you know that's true? Well, the way you know that's true, as you continue to do these practices and teachings, the way you know that's true is the people around you who you've had conflict with, your ex-wives or your children that have had problems, or your parents, right? Or your current partners, right? That the place to look to see how this work makes a difference is to notice that in those relationships you begin to see these people differently. And that comes out of having seen yourself differently. When you forgive yourself and you let go of whatever you hold against yourself or whatever judgments and evaluations you've made about yourself, then who you are is somebody who can see that possibility for everybody else. And so you begin to see the people around you differently, and you begin to experience love for them, regardless of their behavior, regardless of the past. You don't hold on to any grudges. You don't hold on to any incidents or perceptions of people that occurred in the past. That doesn't mean that you become a doormat. That doesn't mean that you make yourself available for people who don't know who they are and are acting out to hurt you. That doesn't mean that, right? You may need to set realistic boundaries in relationships with certain people, but even then you can still love them. Even then you can still know the truth about who they really are. And over time, if you're expressing this unconditional love, the people around you will start to be responsive to you. You'll start to notice people are interested in who you're being, and they're interested in being related to you, and they're interested in getting whatever it is that you have. So that's the possibility that these teachings and these practices make available to us. And it makes the difference. It really makes the difference to be able to be in the world, and who you're being in the world is different. Who you're being in the world is the light that can shine on darkness and bring light to the darkness. And that goes back to what I was talking about a few weeks ago when I shared with you this experiment, the experiment of creating miracles. The experiment where you go through a certain number of steps. I wonder how many of you actually put that to the test. It's an interesting thing to look at, If you didn't put it to the test and you just, took it as an interesting idea, that's unfortunate, because it not only is an opportunity for you to see the truth in action, to see how this all works, but it's an opportunity for you to have a conviction about it and to really verify. Because the reality of what is being said here is one in which, in order for it to be real for you, you really have to take it on and live from that. Start living that way. Start being the truth. I'm working on a new book, and the working title of the book is called Being God. And the reason that I like that title is because it's going to stimulate a reaction for a lot of people, like, how dare you say being God, right? But it may stimulate a reaction, but it opens up the possibility to have a conversation about God, and that's a useful conversation, especially if it ends up being that you come to recognize that the true nature of God is the essential self that we share among ourselves. It is the essence of all that exists. It is a non-dual God. It's a non-dual reality. I sent out a link to you. I don't know how many of you have seen that, the one where Rupert Spira is interacting with a woman who says she was raised Catholic. You always listen to him, right? And he did a beautiful explanation of how it is that people have ended up having an understanding of what God is, to be separate, to be a separate supreme being. that created heaven and earth and all those things. And he really explained to her in a beautiful way how that's what people were left with as a way of trying to understand reality. And the non-dual perspective, the way that God is understood in these teachings and practices, is not in conflict with that. It's not in conflict with that, because it accepts the idea that's what people were able to understand or were able to relate to in terms of having some way of making sense of life. However, these teachings are really an opportunity to get beyond a belief system in which there is a separate God. It's not in conflict with that. As a matter of fact, it is actually in harmony with that, but it takes it to another level in terms of appreciating, as Jesus said, my Father and I are one, right? That's what we're talking about here, that all that exists as far as consciousness and awareness is concerned is one, non-dual, not separate. And that's why the Dalai Lama, when he meets with people, he sees his brothers and sisters. He's not kidding when he says that he sees his brothers and sisters. And so when he enters a auditorium, an audience, it takes a while for him to get to sit down because he has to stop and make contact with his family. That's his experience. It was almost as if you enter a room, and if you were to enter an audience and your family was there, then you went over to your family to say hello, right? But for him, everybody in the room is his family. So that's the experience you have when you're awake and you're being the truth of yourself, is that you're moving among your brothers and sisters. You're moving among your family. And that then becomes a practice, that when your conditioning comes up and you react to other people and you view them as separate from yourself, which will happen because you've been conditioned that way. That's not going to not happen. That you realize it's just the mind running, the same way as I mentioned earlier about the spin class. It's just the mind running. But the reality is your awareness, your consciousness is related to all of human beings as you, as the same as you. It's like somebody said to one of the spiritual teachers, how do you relate to other people? And the teacher said, there are no other people. So that's the reality, and it's a really fulfilling reality when you can experience humanity that way, because it means that when you're with a group of people, you feel at home with people. It doesn't matter who they are, it doesn't matter what their background is, That's why when I was working in prisons, I could sit in a room with a serial killer that was sentenced to death, and I wasn't afraid. I was never afraid. I worked with groups of guys, 35 or 40 guys at a time in a group. And I felt related to those people. I felt related to those people. I felt that we were all on the same level, that we're all sharing a human life here together. And I'll tell you, when somebody's in prison and they have been convicted and they believe that they are a criminal and they believe that they're a sinner, and no matter how much they might argue that they didn't believe that, they did believe that. When you go through the system and you go in front of a judge and you're convicted and you're called a criminal and so forth and so on. Most of the guys in prison that I came across, if not all of them, really believed that they were bad. And when somebody like that gets free and wakes up and sees the truth, it's an amazing thing to witness. It's an amazing thing to witness. I had people's relatives call me. I had inmates' relatives call me when they were working with me in groups and ask me, what are you doing with this person? He's telling his family that he loves them. He's like wanting to actively participate in this family. He wants to actively take responsibility for this family. This person's never behaved like this. He's never said things like this before. But that's what happens when somebody wakes up. So it's very important for you to understand that whatever it is that you got going on about yourself, you know, in terms of whether you not like yourself or not, whether you think you're a good person, whether you think you've done terrible things in the past, etc., you can let it all go. You know, you can let all that go because it's not true. Now, the thing is, it's not true in the sense that you're innocent. Everybody's doing the best they can. This is the truth. Everybody is doing the best they can. If you stop and consider it, how could it be otherwise? Why would anybody not be doing the best they could, right? Everybody's doing the best they can. And if somebody is dangerous and if they are producing harm, right, then that's something that has to be dealt with. But it doesn't mean that the person is bad. It means that the person is operating in a mental state, in a conditioned state that has that way of behaving seem to make sense to them. That's all. Has that way of behaving seem to make sense to them. So even in regard to yourself, you know, if you take what I'm saying seriously and you let go of your attachment to any wrongdoing you've had in the past or any negative judgments that you make about yourself, you can do that and experience the freedom that it provides for you. At the same time, you are accountable for yourself, you see. It has to be so that you're accountable yourself. It doesn't mean that you just walk away from whatever you've done. You may have to make reparations if it's possible to do that. So I hope that that this pointing to this aspect of these teachings and practices is a useful thing for you, that you can surrender to the truth and stop holding on to whatever negative beliefs you have about yourself and about life so that you don't have to suffer with those beliefs anymore.